No, I went and did everyone.
Right.
From that beautiful man, Charlie C. Miller's original work that he did with actually people from, regarding the Federal Reserve, U.S. Treasury, etc. I mean, everyone actually worked on all of this.
Okay, so I've been trying to catch up on all this Heather and Tucci Jarraf stuff because I kind of stopped tracking the OPPT back when they went silent about a year or two ago in Morocco. Now, in this call from prison, she mentions Charles C. Miller. Now, I had looked up Charles C. Miller back when, in 2012-ish, 2013, because he was mentioned in the OPPT filings. Now, it turns out Charlie C. Miller is very central to this, but because back then I did not look up the details of his case. Not sure why, but I'm going to go ahead and go into who Charles C. Miller is because he's very central to this entire thing. Now, this is an article from the Spokesman Review from 1998, in which discusses Charlie C. Miller's criminal case back then. Quote, bad check writers go into prison. Two anti-government activists, one with former ties to the Montana Freemen, are going to federal prison for passing bad checks. Charles C. Miller, 48, faces more than 12 years in prison, and Verrill E. Knowles, 62, will serve more than 11 years in their part in what federal prosecutors say was a scheme to pass $100 million in bogus checks. Miller of Vancouver, Washington, had ties to the Montana Freemen, an anti-government group in Jordan, Montana that was involved in the longest siege in U.S. history in 1996. At sentencing, Friday, in Seattle, both men told the U.S. District Judge John C. Couganor that he didn't have jurisdiction over them. Knowles denied that he was the person who was indicted. You're the one I'm saying sending to prison, sir. Shot back the judge. Knowles is presently serving a 6-year term after being convicted in Kitsap County of intimidating judges. Testimony indicated Knowles and Miller claimed some Washington state officials didn't file their oaths in a timely manner, and therefore every Washington state resident was owed $45,000. Acting on that claim, they wrote bogus checks contending they would be covered by the Washington State Risk Management Office, which handles citizen claims. A federal criminal indictment accusing Knowles and Miller of bank fraud was returned by grand jury in 1997. In 1994, the state of Washington won a $8.8 million civil judgment against Knowles and his wife and a third man for defrauding 12,000 people. The defendants were accused of collecting $1.5 million in a Ponzi scheme that promised people humanitarian grants. In that scheme, which began in 1999, Knowles placed newspaper ads offering to write grants proposals for $20. He claimed his clients could get as much as $30,000 in grants. Now, why is this important? Because as Heather has stated repeatedly, Charles Miller is the guy that inspires her to try the UCC stuff in Washington and causes her to lose her house and inspires her to start the OPPT. Now, with this new Treasury Direct account, we see echoes of it in Charles and Verrill's original scam. Here they were writing bad checks. The TDA is functionally the same thing. Instead of bad checks, it's bad wire transfers. Moving on, the similarities between the Charles Miller case and Heather's case don't end there. Going over to the actual docket of the criminal case against Charles and Verrill Knowles, we see that the charges in Charles' case were bank fraud and frauds and swindles, which are very similar to the charges against Heather. Now, we also get a possible prediction of how much jail time Heather might be looking at from the sentence that that Mr. Miller got. As we can see from the docket, Miller got sentenced to 121 months in jail, in addition to supervised release of 16 months. Now, if we look further down in the docket, in 2007 he violated the terms of his parole and was sentenced to an additional 36 months of jail in, what's this, 4/6/2007. What's also interesting is that he would have been released around 2009, at which point he must have gotten involved with Heather directly after getting out of jail, which is not a good sign. If Heather is being influenced by a guy that just got out of jail, that's not a good thing. You shouldn't be acting on advice from a guy that just got out of 10 years in jail. Moving on, I obtained some snippets of the paperwork that Charles Miller was filing in his criminal case. What stands out to me here, I'm gonna scroll down over here, is that Charles was using UCC type filings to try to get out of jail at this point. This was in 2004. He was still in jail at that point. And we see that he was trying Montana Freeman type stuff, UCC type stuff, a lot of mentions of bonds, attachment of registration of bonded performance nonsense. None of this worked, by the way, obviously. But we can see this is where this is coming from. We have a direct line of Charles coming from the Montana Freemen, trying a version of the Montana Freemen check scam, going to jail, and then inspiring Heather to do a similar thing with OPPT and now with the Treasury direct accounts. Now, this is the document that I really like. It's a transcript of one of the hearings with Charles. Now, what's interesting about this is that in 2007, he violated his probation. And the way in which he violated his probation is interesting. Not interesting. It says a lot. Let me highlight it. Charles got busted violating his probation. Number one, he was driving without a valid driver's license, which is standard sovereign citizen stuff. Secondly, he failed to register as a convicted felon in the state of Nevada. If you move into Nevada and you're a convicted felon, you're supposed to register and tell, hey, I'm a convicted felon, blah, blah, blah. He didn't do that. Now, the more interesting things is that he started associating with convicted felons between March and December of 2006 in violation of his parole conditions. And there's other stuff like he failed to provide financial information. He's supposed to tell them if he's working, etc. He didn't do that. Moving on, in page 11, it says that he threatened the Nevada Highway Patrol, saying that he would charge them $75,000 in silver coins if they pursued the citation. And if there was any physical injury, he would charge them $1 million in silver coins. Now, silver coins is very interesting because in the OPPT paperwork, all the monetary amounts are measured in silver coins. Now, I need to check whether or not he got this from Republic for the United States of America, Tim Turner, because Tim Turner was also a fan of charging people in silver coins. Moving on page 16, did you at some point become aware that Mr. Miller was associating felons? Answer, yes. Initially, Mr. Miller advised me of that on March 22nd, 2001. Question, what did he tell you? He stated that he had been corresponding with federal inmates across the country. Did he say why he was corresponding with those inmates? He stated something to the effect of providing legal research for them. Now, this is amazing because this guy just got out of jail and now he's helping other people that are in jail to try to get out of jail, even though everything that he filed did not work. But here we can see that as early as 2001, Charles was trying to spread his nonsense to other people. It seems like Heather was eventually somehow became one of those people that Charles was giving legal advice to. How that happened, I'm still not sure. Moving on, they search his apartment and we got a full list of all the people that Charles was giving legal advice to in jail. There's Louis Vincent Hughes, incarcerated SeaTac. Who else? There's another guy here. I already read that one. Vincent Louis Hughes. Here we go. Somebody named Holtz Claw, incarcerated in Arkansas. Michael Staggs, a convicted felon. Albert Johnson, another convicted felon. Who else? Matt Bardassian, convicted of numerous fraud charges. This was around 2006. We see here that Miller and him met in jail in 2005, which is it. So Miller was influencing a whole bunch of people via the mail that were in jail. Now then, around page 43, Miller starts to explain why he didn't get a driver's license. Quote, "In our conversation, Mr. Crawford, did we have a conversation about the driver statutes relating to commerce driving statutes only? And did I advise you that I was not commerce driving?" So here we see that Charles Miller was falling for the driving, you only need a driver's license if you are engaged in commerce nonsense. He makes this even more explicit in page 52. Quote, "The state statutes admit that the driver's license is a voluntary act and not required unless someone is engaged in commerce." That's Charles stating his beliefs about the law. And finally, we have this humorous exchange between Charles and the judge. Quote, "You've attempted, Mr. Cohenor, whatever, that's the judge's name anyways, previously to force me to admit I was a United States citizen, which I cannot do. I cannot be a slave. And if that is what's going to happen here, now I guess that's the way it has to be. And I'll just continue on going to the Congress and the international parties to see where we can find someone who is honest. If you have to give me the benefit of the Sixth Amendment as required by the Supreme Court of the United States, and in front of all these officers, and including the U.S. Office of Justice acting in containment of those orders, I also want to know who is going to indemnify me for these damages. Judicial notice is controls, and you've had judicial notice. Will a court issue a order of dismissal at this point?" Judge says no. "All right, will you order all property taken from my office to be returned?" The judge says no. Charlie continues, "I am the real party in interest, the secured party for the rest." Now, secured party is interesting because that's Tim Turner stuff. "The exclusivity holder, and there is no evidence for the contrary to these facts. Anyone having contrary evidence is invited to bring it forth, but until then these facts stand." The judge says, "I find the government has proven violations 1 through 6. Give us a disposition date," and that's where it ends. After that, he gets the additional 36 months. Now, after cross-referencing Tim Turner stuff, okay, the transcript in which Charlie is discussing stuff that he got from Tim Turner is from 2007 November, and at that point Tim Turner was active and giving seminars across the country. So it does look like to me that Charles Miller, after leaving jail and being on probation, somehow got involved with Tim Turner, started watching or going to his seminars, which would explain where he got the silver stuff and all that stuff. So that which is interesting because again, Heather is using a lot of Tim Turner stuff, who, for the record, is still in jail, which is another red flag if you are listening to Heather. Be aware that the people who helped her create the OPPT and the now Treasury Direct Account stuff all went to jail for substantial amounts of time. She is basing all her actions on information that she got from criminals. That's a bad idea to do. So if you're considering doing some sort of TDA thing, be aware that Heather is basing her actions on stuff that came from as far back as the Montana Freemen, going to Charles C. Miller, who again went to jail for almost 10 years for this nonsense. Gets out of jail, starts listening to Tim Turner, who himself was also sent to jail for this type of scam. And at that point, he starts influencing Heather and telling her to do this kind of nonsense. You know, Heather's entire thing is nonsense upon nonsense upon nonsense that she got from people who went to jail and failed. Just criminals, fraudsters. Don't get sucked into something that is this flawed.